definitely believe, I obviously teach at the moment in a school where a lot of young people are trying to go into these kinds of jobs, and I do believe that it is so important to spend a year or two living in a rural community, because the experience of that totally changes your view of what's possible. And that relates also to my work in Afghanistan over the last 3.5 years, where I've been trying to run a non-profit, where the lessons day by day, both on what can be done, but almost as importantly, what cannot be done, are rammed home minute by minute in trying to do quite simple tasks.
Your nonprofit has a truly wonderful name, Turquoise Mountain. Describe what you're trying to do there.
So we've gone in, we're restoring the center of the old city of Kabul. We're trying to provide incomes to Afghan women and men. We train people in woodwork, calligraphy, ceramics, jewelry. There are great gemstones in Afghanistan. We also work to simply restore that part of the city. We bring in water supply, sewerage. We have an elementary school. We have a clinic. We've restored about 65 buildings, got about 500 employees. It's probably the most satisfying thing I've done in my life.
And how does it fit into the larger picture of what we are trying to do in Afghanistan?
Well, I think, firstly, it teaches me that it's all about Afghan leadership. The best bits of our project work because the Afghans have asked for it. They came to me and they said, we'd like an elementary school. And I said, that's not in my strategic plan. I don't want to do an elementary school. And they said, well, you better build an elementary school. And it's turned out to be the best bit about it. 165 children turned up within about an hour. And it just makes me very happy seeing it. On the other hand, it's also taught me the kind of scale of challenges you're facing. We arrived and the garbage, the trash was 7 feet deep in the streets. People were climbing over their courtyard walls because they couldn't get through their doors. We had to clear 17,000 trucks of garbage. And this is only 2 years ago, 200 meters from the presidential palace in the center of Kabul. So just to get a sense of there's no sewage system in the capital city, which has got nearly 4 million people. When you take that on board, the idea that you're somehow going to be able overnight to create legitimate, effective, stable state structures, and the writ of the government will run into every remote village, and that the Taliban will be defeated once and for all, and we're just going to be able to go home in 3 years' time, mission accomplished, is missing the point. It's like talking to somebody, maybe, I don't want to push this analogy too far, but somebody who works in another poor country, like working in sub-Saharan Africa or working in Nepal. It's a long, painful process where even delivering water supply turns out to take a lot of ingenuity and 2 years of negotiation.
From all of your travels in Afghanistan, particularly the work with your charity, what do you think the Afghan people would like us to do?
I believe the Afghan people are divided. This is a very atomized country. There are certainly some people in the Taliban areas in the south and east who are fighting with the Taliban, and who are very skeptical about foreign presence and perceive this as an occupation. In the center and the north of the country, there are many people who see the United States as their saviors, who see us as their best defense against the Taliban. There are many Afghan women, of course, who are very, very grateful for the opportunities they now have and are looking on us to protect them against particularly extreme Islamists who they think would suppress those rights. But most of all, Afghans, I think, day to day, are not actually obsessed with the Taliban. What they're obsessed with is normal security, by which they mean crime, looting, kidnapping, gangsterism. Most of my colleagues in Afghanistan would be scared to get in a car to go down to Kandahar, not because of the Taliban, but because of the criminal gangs. They're horrified by their police, which is perceived as very predatory, very corrupt. They're very skeptical about their government. They're impatient with how slowly the aid development has come. There's a lot of inflation. They find it difficult to pay their rent.
So they're just trying to get by, is what you're saying.
Right, and just to turn it around, I mean, one way of putting it, I don't know whether this is helpful, but if you're an Afghan villager, you sit in your village, maybe in southern Afghanistan, and one day the Taliban turn up. And you probably don't like them very much because they're young, fanatical men banging on about religion, but you might give them a cup of tea, they go away. Next day, maybe some Canadian soldiers turn up. Maybe they search your house. That makes you a little bit uncomfortable, but you give them a cup of tea, they go away. The next day, the Afghan police turn up. They may not be wearing uniforms. They're waving guns around. They may be rude to your daughter. You give them a cup of tea, they go away. Basically, you want these people, by and large, to go away. Most Afghan villagers are finding themselves trapped in a very, very unpleasant battle between forces that they barely understand. And the Afghan government needs to take the initiative. The Afghan government needs to convince these people that they have a long-term future in working with the government in Kabul. It's not something that foreign troops can do.
Rory, you're on your way to Afghanistan this week. Will you be trying to change anybody's mind when you go over there?
I try all the time. And I think maybe one way of looking at it is to say, look, maybe I can't change your mind today, but let's at least sketch out an alternative strategy. What I would say is a strategy which is more modest, a strategy which tries to think very, very clearly about what we're going to achieve over the long term and how to resource it. Unless you understand what a frankly low base that country's starting from, a country where 60% of civil servants don't have a high school education, where maybe 40% of the population can't read and write, where maybe a quarter of teachers are illiterate. Unless you get that, you don't get why you can't build that amazing thing that you're trying to build. And people keep coming back and saying, oh, all you're saying is we need to be realistic in our expectations. And my response is, yeah, but you don't quite get how realistic I mean. I don't just mean drop it from Jeffersonian democracy to vaguely stable state. I mean, even that vaguely stable state is a pretty distant dream. You're
saying these people need water. They need the simplest things before they can even think about the larger issue.
Right, absolutely. And that you could invest 20, 30 years in Afghanistan, and if you were lucky, you would make it look a bit like Pakistan. I mean, unless you understand that Pakistan is 20, 30 years ahead of Afghanistan, you don't understand where we're starting from. And Pakistan is still not an ideal state. But the Pakistan army, the police, the civil service, the financial administration, the education sector are all decades ahead of the Afghan. So our whole model is broken from the beginning, because you could put all this investment in, you would make Afghanistan look a bit more like Pakistan, but that wouldn't achieve whatever your national security objectives seem to be.
So to sum up, President Obama has his big decision, and your advice is?
My advice to President Obama is you're going to have to increase troops now. It's too late for you, because you're going to be destroyed politically if you oppose your general on the ground on something like this. But let's think now 6 months, a year down the line. We're going to have to decrease again. We can't keep these numbers indefinitely. Cap it. Don't go up any further. That's it. If the military come back in 6 months and say, by the way, we'd like another 50,000, another 6,000, no. Say, this is all you're going to get. And furthermore, this is all you're going to get, and the numbers are going to decrease. Force the military to work out what they're going to do with less. This isn't an ideological point. It's just a fact. They're going to have less in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years than they have today. So let's try to frame a policy that works out what we can do to protect the United States and help the Afghan people with fewer troops. And hopefully, that'll mean we can have a long-term sustainable relationship instead of this boom and bust in and out that I fear is coming.
Rory Stewart, thank you very much for your insights into Afghanistan.
Thank you very much.